Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with Fluence, which is a special one because it comes to you in association with two of our brands here at Solar Media, PV Tech and Energy Storage News. In this session, we'll be learning how industry leaders are optimizing the performance of their renewable energy and energy storage assets with the help of the latest digital technologies and data gathering techniques. I'm Andy Colthorpe, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Solar Media. Day to day, I'm the editor of Energy Storage News, but I'm also proud to be part of the PV Tech family too, and try to keep my interests in all things solar PV up to date as well. This past couple of years has seen great momentum in the clean energy industries. In North America, the US Inflation Reduction Act has turbocharged investment into renewables and storage, which was already going strong. Canada looks set to follow with a package of tax credit incentives of its own. Meanwhile, European Union member states have upped their renewable energy targets, and the bloc has identified energy storage as a central piece of its energy transition. Even countries outside the EU, like the UK, are moving fast in their adoption of clean energy technologies for the power sector. Those are just a handful of examples, and we see renewable energy adoption gather pace elsewhere, from Asia to Latin America and of course Africa. And where that happens, energy storage is bound to follow. These developments show that there is will and appetite to deal with energy sector emissions and replace our old paradigms of the centralized thermal generation-based systems with new inverter-based renewable energy systems. But the challenges ahead include that old question, who is going to pay for it all? Well, the simple answer is that it's a global situation that requires global approaches. We will all benefit from the energy systems of the future, so we should all pay for it. The more complex and perhaps more practical answer is that owners, investors, and operators of clean energy assets need a solid business case to build upon. That means scaling up the solutions we have already, like solar PV, wind turbines, and batteries, and ensuring they perform as expected. And that also means minimizing downtime and maximizing revenues, which requires much more attention than many people might think. Luckily, advanced data-driven solutions leveraging AI and machine learning exist to optimize whole portfolios, entire fleets of renewable energy and storage assets to meet those challenges. Today's experts know all about these issues, and in this webinar, we'll be learning about data management, performance analysis, prioritization of issues, and reporting, how they work, and why each of them is so important to the business case for clean energy. Joining us today is Gianmarco Pizza, Head of Digital Asset Performance Management at Fluence, and also with us is Stefan van Niekerk, Head of Operations at BTE Renewables. In today's session, presentations from Gianmarco and Stefan will be followed by a short panel discussion style interview, which I'll be moderating. And as always, interaction with you, the audience, is very important to us. So please do put your questions for the speakers in the tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible during the session. Now, obviously, we won't get through every audience question. Unfortunately, we have only limited time, but the experts and the team at Fluence will be more than happy to follow up offline and answer your questions for you in due course. So, and also final reminder that the session today is being recorded and slides will be sent to all registered participants. So with that, and without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first speaker today. Over to you, Gianmarco.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. Before introducing Fluence, I would just quickly add a few words about me. I'm a mechanical engineer. I started my career in the energy sector 15 years ago, working as an asset manager of combined cycle gas-fired power stations, and then quickly moved into the renewable sector, first the wind and then other technologies. And I want to mention this because this experience helped a lot for understanding the problems of the industry and the needs of the clients which we are serving today. So at Fluence, we are enabling the global clean energy transition with market-leading energy storage products and services, and also cloud-based software solutions for renewables and storage assets. As of today, we have 6.6 gigawatt of energy storage projects, a presence in over 47 markets, and more than 20 gigawatt of renewable and storage plants optimized in real time with our software solutions Mosaic for the bidding optimization and Nispera for the asset performance management. I hand over to Stefan for an introduction of BTE.
Thank you, Andy and John Marco. Yes, I'm Stefan van Niekerk. I'm head of operation at BTE Renewables, responsible for our asset management as well as development of new assets or construction of new assets. Similar to John Marco, a mechanical engineering background, and I started in the nuclear field, moved on to geothermal, to thermal, where I also consulted to various companies, and then with the big drive for renewables that we've seen in South Africa, we moved into renewable energy space. I then looked after construction of a number of projects up in Africa, and currently looking after this the operation and the construction of new assets for BTE. BTE is a company that started about 20 years ago in South Africa. It was actually focused on gas and cogeneration, but around 2010 moved on to focus on renewables when the first renewable auction was launched in South Africa. We were then successful in winning 3 projects, which we later sold. From there, we acquired more projects, developed more projects, and established more projects. And currently we have 500 megawatt of renewables in South Africa and in Kenya. And these have all come online between 2020 and 2021, so relatively new. And this is also the story that we have to tell, because we walked the path of getting these projects into operation together with Nispera, and that is where we can add a bit of value to the discussion today. I can also mention that it's been announced recently that BTE is being acquired by Engie, so we'll soon be part of this larger platform of renewable projects in Southern Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stefan. I continue now with this, let's say, common challenges in asset performance management, which Andy already anticipated. And obviously, having been asset managers, we know them very well, and I trust most of you can also find themselves into at least some of them. In this webinar, we will deep dive on these top 5 challenges which we identified and introduce some best practices and practical examples your team can leverage to improve the management of your portfolios. When we speak about data management, it's really about the point that there is too much data to handle, too much time is spent on manual data collection, integration, and we will look more in detail in the next few slides on this. Portfolio visibility, it's about getting a consistent and homogeneous portfolio-wide picture of what's going on. And it's even more challenging when having different technologies from different OEMs. Stefan will share the experience of BTE on this. We move then to the identification and prioritization of issues. So asset managers struggle to identify assets or part of the assets which may have problems, simply because the alarms coming from the OEM's SCADA systems are poor, and the data which one would need to analyze is far too complex and too big. So we will look at some examples there on how AI can help. Next challenge is the maintenance planning. So how do I go about communicating then with O&M providers or service technicians once an issue is identified in order to get it addressed? And here also it will be interesting to hear some experience from BT on how they do this in their daily operations. And finally, we know that it's very challenging to harmonize data from various sources and get it into the right format with the right information for the right audience at the right time. So the topic here is obviously reporting at different levels inside the organization. And again, you will hear from Stefan the experience which BT has made on this. If we move straight into the first of these challenges, data management, here the problem is twofold. On one side, we have a dramatic increase in terms of data volume associated with renewable and storage plants. And if we compare this to conventional assets, for example, for a solar farm, there is approximately 5 times more data points generated, whereas this number can go up to 100 times for a battery storage plant. And in addition to that, the second point is the complexity of this data in terms of different sources, different structures, different naming conventions. So how can you handle this quantity of complex data across your portfolio of renewables and storage plants? Traditional methods of which were obviously working, let's say, in the conventional power generation world with a limited number of assets do not work anymore today, simply because of these challenges in data volume and complexity. So it would require simply too much time for your asset management team if they wouldn't leverage all the automation and know-how which is available out there. And they would end up being involved or spending most of their time in these tasks without having sufficient time then to take action, which is obviously where they really create value. So what we see in terms of best practices, how to cut down the work needed to wrangle data so that you can shift your attention to analysis and action, is summarized in this box at the bottom of this slide. So first of all, it's about implementing an automated industry-proven data collection process across various asset types and OEMs. In addition, you need to take care of data cleansing and filtering to maintain the sufficient high level of data quality, and obviously also focus on data continuity. As you know, any analysis or KPI calculation is weak, if not completely useless, if the underlying data set is not good enough. Next is obviously to apply data harmonization across your portfolio, which includes a standardized data model across different OEMs and technologies. Whenever possible, ideally it should be based also on international standards which are available. And then also ensuring a highly available, redundant, and secure cloud storage, which should be easily accessible by everybody within the organization, also external parties, possibly through API, where all data should be stored starting from the COD. And you will need your historical data at one point, at the latest when you will need to run portfolio analysis or assessments like the ones which BT went through during the recent discussions with ENGIE, as Stefan just mentioned. Finally, a very important point is to make sure that you have a long-term partner who is not only setting up the processes described before, but is also actively supervising them so that you can be sure that whenever you need the data, it is there with the right quality. This sounds trivial, but we see several operators which are still struggling with this. I now hand it over back to Stefan to talk about his experience in getting a clear portfolio-wide view when managing assets of different technologies and different manufacturers.
Yeah, thanks, Gianmarco. This links very well onto what you just explained in terms of the effort that goes into the front end of the process if it's not well coordinated. What we found was when we started operating our assets in 2021, that each of these assets had a different SCADA system. They had different operating companies looking after them. They had different OEMs guarding their systems. And we had operational contracts with KPIs that looked different. So information was guarded. It was difficult to get to. And you often had to get various login details for each of the systems. There was different people that were moving around. So it was very difficult to scale up and to get a true reflection of what is happening at the portfolio level, not giving us visibility to make decisions and to move forward with optimization in that sense. So this picture is a perfect example of how confusing it can be when your data is not coordinated well. If we move on to the next slide, we've since achieved a position where we do have portfolio visibility, and that's been done with Nispera through a 2-year at least process. And the characteristics of that portfolio level visibility is what is listed here. So firstly, we now have a place where all of our data is collated. It gets extracted from the various SCADA systems. So we don't change anything on the SCADA. We just extract data from the various plant SCADA systems and store the essential data in a central place. This then gives us accessibility to this data, but it gives accessibility on different levels of granularity. So you can have executive views. I can jump in and see today what my plant is doing. And our technicians can go into the lowest level of where's our solar trackers at the moment, which of our inverters are actually overheating, where is a wind turbine down on maintenance. So that kind of visibility is available on the lower level of granularity. Then there's also highly configurable dashboards. We have dashboards that we can click on, that we can view, but we also have this delivered to our inboxes. And we often ask Nispera, can we update these dashboards? Can we have a different view from a different perspective? And that is the accessibility we now have and the ability to summarize our data so that we can make quicker decisions. There's also a real-time view and a historical view on each of the assets. With the fact that you pull the data out and you store the data yourself, you can access that data going back up to COD or earlier, sometimes into commissioning. But we also have a real-time view. I can see what has happened. Now, normally Nispera will give me a status that data was updated the last 5 minutes or 2 minutes ago. So we always have a real-time view together with the historical view where you can go and check what has happened with your plant. And I think then very important in today's age, time and age, is the cybersecurity practices. When you have all these various systems, you have passwords that you have to share, you have to get different firewalls in place. When we work via Nispera to get our data and to collate our data, we have one set of principles that we can apply to all the plants, and we do not have to bother with further working and compromising our cybersecurity in that sense. So portfolio visibility has definitely been achieved in our case, and it's used on a daily basis to take action where we can see that is required. Thanks, Gianmarco. I hand over back to you for the activities on notifications.
Thanks, Stefan. And yes, let's look at a level deeper here from portfolio visibility, really trying to understand how do we identify and prioritize potential performance issues. As an asset owner, I'm sure you are familiar with these challenges. How do I know if one of my plants is not performing well? The larger the portfolios become in size and complexity, the more difficult this becomes. You may have dozens or hundreds of wind turbines or of different manufacturers, or even thousands of inverters on your solar farms. So it becomes practically impossible to be aware of performance or operational risks. And SCADA alerts do not really help with this. And even if you were able, let's say, in a way or another, to identify a performance issue, the next challenge would be how to estimate the energy loss. In order to prioritize the activities, you need to run a cost-benefit analysis. And for this, you need a reliable, site-specific, producible model for each technology. And finally, obviously, is how do I compare across my fleet? So assets located in different places, might be even different continents, and with dissimilar operating conditions, can show very contrasting performance figures. And in a limit case, you may have that in one case on an asset, you have an anomaly, which could actually be a healthy situation on the same asset elsewhere. So let's look in the next slide at a few examples on how operators can more efficiently uncover performance issues in wind, solar, and storage plants with the support of AI. And what artificial intelligence really helps with is to analyze large amounts of data to uncover patterns or anomalies that may be difficult or impossible for humans to catch by sifting through SCADA data. Here you see a few common operational issues which we see across solar, wind, and storage assets, and how AI can help detect them. Starting from the left, we see an image of the Nispera web application, which is showing our model for tracker fault detection on solar plants. As you know, a malfunctioning tracker on a PV plant can cause a production loss even larger than 20%. And an industry-wide issue is that solar asset owners are suffering. Basically, there is lack or reduced quality of tracker position data, and therefore the asset manager or operators often do not know if the tracker in their PV systems are working correctly or not. So AI models can really overcome this by detecting tracker faults independently from the signals of the tracker system. For example, by utilizing shape recognition algorithms applied to the daily production profiles of the strings or combiner boxes installed to that specific tracker. Moving to the middle of the slide, we see an example about wind. You know that within a wind farm, the performance of each wind turbine is different from any other due to the terrain orography, the flow patterns, and the changing environmental conditions. So therefore, in order to assess the performance of a wind turbine, one needs to consider the complex multidimensional characteristic of the problem, which is not looking only at power versus wind speed, but also taking into account other dimensions like the wind direction, the air temperature, pressure, etc. So again, a very suitable problem for AI. Here it can be used to derive the reference performance for each individual wind turbine under different operating conditions, and then be used to continuously check the adherence of the actual operational efficiency of each wind turbine to this reference behavior. And in this way, a site manager can receive notifications if performance deviates from the reference and demand an intervention from its O&M provider. Whereas, as we know, practically all SCADA systems from the OEMs do not provide any alarm for this kind of problems. Obviously, also here, the production losses can be very significant. And last example on the right-hand side is for a battery storage plant. At Fluence, we are using in this AI for storage plants to anticipate when cell temperatures may get higher than expected. So the model here predicts what the max cell temperatures should be under the given operating conditions and issues an alarm if the measured cell temperatures exceed that value by a certain threshold or exhibit a certain trend. And this can happen obviously for many different reasons, like very simple ones like a faulty chiller. And besides performance implications, it can also have very severe risk implications, which obviously one wants to avoid. So let's say we have identified a potential operational issue at one of the plants of our portfolio. So how can we take that information and turn it into something actionable without waiting that something goes wrong? So let's say, in other words, how can we move from a reactive to a proactive asset management approach? Well, I try to sketch it in this slide here. We almost already discussed the anticipate and plan action, which basically the tools which we described in the previous slide are putting the asset owner in a position to identify and prioritize on potential issues on his assets. Now, in order to properly plan, one also needs power generation forecasting together with electricity price forecasts, depending on the market, obviously, in which the plants are operating, in order to optimize the maintenance scheduling so as to minimize revenue losses. As a second step, once the source of the issue is identified, it's essential to collaborate with the O&M team and other stakeholders involved to address it. For example, here it's important to bring everybody to create alignment across the organization. So, for example, make sure that there are dashboards for various teams to log into and view the necessary information, or are there daily reports that flag issues for maintenance teams to look into, or if needed, do you have the right tools to calculate contractual KPIs or liquidated damages in a fully independent and transparent way? I trust Stefan will have a lot to say about this and the experience of BTE on these points. And finally, obviously, a highly efficient work stream with all the data integrated into one platform, from identifying the issue to tracking its resolution to visualizing the performance after the maintenance activity will strongly simplify your management tasks and will provide the right transparency in the value creation process across all stakeholders involved. For our last challenge about reporting, I will hand over back to Stefan.
Yeah, thanks, Gianmarco. It all comes together on the reporting aspect. And also, I mean, if you think about maintenance, you want reports so that you can focus on the right things. What we found at BTE was that, again, we started with these 5-6 plants, 2021, and we didn't have a system to work with. What we tried to do was look for templates, what will be the best reporting method that we can use. We extracted data from everywhere. As on a monthly basis. We contemplated whether we should be doing this on a daily basis. What's our source every time? What's our access? As I mentioned, platform visibility, and this creates a very large load on your resources, and often it stalls the reporting and it stalls the decision making, and that's not where we want to be. So moving across, we obviously, again, on the same platform aspect that we discussed, we now have flexible reporting what Nispera gave us was that ability to pull the reports from the same database that we actually had the portfolio visibility, and it gives us flexibility in reporting. We often have to do for various stakeholders, maybe our lenders, maybe our shareholders, you have to do a monthly, a quarterly, half yearly, or sometimes an annual report. And the ability to pull the data from the various assets at the same time for a period is what we have at the moment, and it gives us the ability to quickly do that, so that again we can summarize our data in a way that the stakeholders are able to work with them. We also have intuitive reports that are already set up, and they are sent to our inboxes on a daily basis. We actually get daily, weekly, monthly, and annual reports for each of our assets and for a combination of the platform, which makes it very easy to pick up a report and share that report on where you're at. The data is then consistent and auditable as well. That it means that we can, when we report, we don't have to worry about where does the data come from, which individual was processing this data, was the spreadsheet, the integrity of the spreadsheet correct, because we know that the data is now processed in a way that that can be audited and that can be fine-tuned if we do need to convert anything, correct anything. On power metrics, we have actually set up interesting daily reports, for instance, on deemed generated energy losses, where you have a take or pay arrangement and you are curtailed or your grid is not available. Some of our PPAs are very stringent in terms of how we could claim, and we've managed to set up reports that get delivered daily that use all the required metrics and then give us a calculation of any power that was or would have been lost in this process. Making claims and contract management via these reports also very practical. If I move on to what our reports look like, there's some examples on this slide. On the left, some of our executive reports. That's for one of our wind farms. We have views that say, okay, this is where you're at after 6 months. This is what your target will be. We provide our P50, P75, P90 budgets to Nispera to input into our reports, and we can report against whatever budget we want. We can then track this over a monthly, daily, yearly basis, and these executive reports gives everyone a very good feel of where we're at. It closely resembles what we do in our financial reporting as well at that stage. On the technical reports, if you look at what we have on the right-hand side, there we have one of our solar plants, for instance, and you can easily see when there's a portion of the solar field not performing or not producing as it is expected to produce, whether it's trackers at that stage or whether we have inverter problems that can be identified. But what we see at the very first view is, okay, we have a problem, and we can then contact our site operators as quickly as possible to address the issue and correct it, and so avoid some power losses in the process. So it's been very useful for us. We've also set up a small control room where Nispera is monitored and where immediate reporting is received, and where we can then action some of these points with our plant managers. So that's it. Let me hand back to John Marco for closeout on and for wrapping up on the topics.
Thanks, Stefan. Yes, we went relatively fast during this last minutes. We will probably have time for questions, but let's say overall the techniques we utilize to track and manage renewable and storage asset performance are evolving quickly, and the leading players in the industry are starting to use AI and other cutting-edge methods to maximize the asset value. Our solution, Nispera, maximizes the value of solar, wind, hydro, and storage assets from any OEM, not only Fluence, obviously, by going beyond traditional asset performance management to offer a comprehensive and sophisticated set of AI-based asset performance optimization tools, including a best-in-class software solution for battery storage plants. We were among the first ones to integrate this technology as well. And the result for our clients is that they are able, obviously, to address with our solution some of their major challenges when it comes to maximizing the performance of their plants. And this results in a typical annual profit uplift, anything between 3 and 10% of the annual target. So I think I give it back to Andy for next stage.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gianmarco and Stefan. And yeah, a lot of ground covered in a fairly short time. And I can see already that's given our audience a lot to think about. So plenty of good questions coming in from the audience. You have a few more minutes if you do have a question for Gianmarco or Stefan. But before we get to that, yeah, a few questions from myself. Allow me to exercise my editorial privilege, let's say. And I just want to ask a few quick questions of today's speakers. So, Stefan, you're really coming from at this from let's say, a customer or client perspective to Fluence and Ispera, which I think is something the audience will be really interested to, know more about. Because I think some of the challenges you face are the similar ones that they're facing. But if we just take a step back, we talk a lot about digitalization of the energy sector being one of the 4Ds of the energy transition, and it's perhaps one that's come more recently than, say, decarbonization or decentralization, but it's an important one. So I'm just thinking, in terms of what things look like today with a lot of the recent technologies that enable asset performance management to be as sophisticated as it is now. What did that whole scene look like, say, 5 to 10 years ago, and how different is that really from the way things are managed and operated today?
Yeah, I think if we look 5 or 10 years ago, we had much bigger utilities looking after portfolio management and monitoring. So there were maybe some bespoke systems and collection of data on a very high level for a handful of companies. In general, we were working on system integration where we had one plant to look after, or maybe two plants. Where today we're looking at thousands of IPPs having a number of plants, whether that's 5, 10, or 100 plants that they're looking at, and this data needs to be integrated, and that's where we're at today. We have to integrate the data of a number of not so complex, they are complex, but not so complex renewable plants, where it's about understanding how we can fine-tune these machines so that we can get more out of them. So it's really been on how do we manage more of these data streams in a quicker way so that we can get better performance.
Right, so it's not just the sophistication of the technologies or the granularity of the data, but actually the whole scale at which asset management is being done, really, I guess, is one of the biggest changes, I suppose you could say.
Exactly.
Okay, and in terms of bringing us into the present day, then what kind of challenges in asset performance, and we talked a lot, I guess, in the presentation about some of the challenges, but if you could select, let's say, a kind of hierarchy in terms of those challenges, which asset performance challenges does BTE face, do you think, that have the kind of highest impact on your profitability today?
Yeah, I would say if you approach it generally, first it's understanding our energy availability of each of the plants and on platform level. You want that view, and you've got various contracts to work with that have got different metrics. So to get that view established is really important, and then to be able to allocate energy losses to collective problems has really been important in our case. And there, for instance, on our solars, we've had our biggest losses coming from inverter clipping, sometimes in summer months. And this is now during a defect notification period, I must also say that. So we've been able to to look at, identify the size and the source of the problem and address that while our contracts are being closed out. That's one. The other one have been, for instance, PV tracking issues. We sometimes have startup problems in the morning. So we've been able to identify those not only immediately, but also on the longer term, quantify what our losses are, address it with our contractors, and then move forward. But also when it happens, we can actually take action immediately and move forward. We've also had a very interesting case of one of our wind farms not performing as we wanted to in its first year, and us not having a full understanding of the turbine technology at that stage. We were able to pull Nispera in to do a full analysis of all parameters on the wind farm in a high level collective way, using really granular data to look at, could the yawing be a problem? Is it the resource, or is it the power curve? And all of these things we were able to pull together to say, look, it's actually a low resource here, and our plant is performing very well. So that's kind of the examples that I have there, Andy.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, from my perspective as someone kind of looking from the outside into the industry and having done so for a few years now, I really feel like, yeah, I mean, we talked about the scale, obviously, but again, the sophistication of the technology, where a few years ago, I guess you would be kind of looking at how a plant performed kind of after the fact, and then trying to figure out like what those performance issues might have been. Whereas I guess today the digital options available to you allow you to kind of do that in real time, and to kind of be looking forwards, really, I guess. And Gianmarco, I think there's something to be said, isn't there, and what Stefan's talking about in terms of previously it was kind of individual plant level here and there, and now it's portfolios, it's fleets, it's everything that's on the scale that we really need for the energy transition, and as we were saying before, for clean energy to be a sustainable business. But yeah, I mean, is anything from the provider side to be said on that?
Well, I mean, I think one comment which we could make there is sensibilizing all the industry in sharing as much data as possible, which comes also with sharing experience. And I'm talking more about the angle of model development, and in particular AI, where we know very well that the better results can be achieved the more data the models can train upon. So I would encourage everybody from the industry to be open and move in that direction for the benefit of the industry itself.
Okay, and while we're talking about people and the industry and the all-important human factor, which still remains even in these early days of AI potential takeover, I guess you could say. I think one thing that we're hearing a lot about on a slightly more serious note is that skilling up the workforce and just attracting people into the workforce is a challenge, because again, the scale we have for the energy transition that is needed. I think there was a recent survey from the Interstate Renewable Energy Council in the US, where 44% of solar companies said that, particularly skilled jobs, they were finding it a bit difficult to fill those positions. So I don't really need to take this into a conversation about workforce and that kind of thing, but just wondering how the rapid evolution of asset performance kind of changes the way that folks work within the sector, and how you think the rapid evolution of asset performance management will impact workforce development. I don't know who wants to take this first, or if both of you want to answer. Maybe Stefan, you can.
Yeah, I'll jump in just with again live examples from what we've been doing and seeing. We've obviously seen a younger workforce that wants to get involved very quickly. What we've done at BTE is to set up a monitoring control room where we monitor our assets with live screens of our Nispera interface for each plant, and our young engineers then get a chance to be a real interface between the portfolio view, the technical view, and the plants. On the parallel to that, we also give them opportunity to process data manually and then compare that with what we have in Nispera. And from there, they jump into the organization, into business development or into project engineering or into pure engineering. And we've seen a real growth in the understanding of what the business is about, because that's also where we run our invoices to the utilities from. So all of these aspects, bringing that together around the data that we now have and the data management practices that we've established, have given us, I think, more savvy engineers to work with, and they have been able to progress quicker through the first steps in the organization, for sure.
Yeah, Stefan, I see the same also from our side. I mean, it's obviously very important to have skilled and well-educated engineers, but I would say the focus is not anymore primarily on the technology understanding, but more increasingly on their data science capabilities, which really put them in a position to find the way through this information and to try to read through the models. It's not necessarily about developing them, but really understanding. In some cases, for example, you can configure some parameters, or you can, by understanding what is happening, it allows you basically to better utilize the results. It's probably could be compared like to a pilot of a modern aircraft, which in the best case doesn't do much, but he needs to still understand what's going on. And yeah, it's required more than I would say in the past from the workforce.
Excellent, excellent. So the automation doesn't necessarily lead to a lesser need for, let's say, for human intervention, but yeah, definitely, if I could be a little bit trite and say that, I guess the simple answer is that smart energy needs smart people, really, I guess. And yeah, hopefully a couple of journalists along the way as well might be required. I don't know, perhaps not. But, I think, in very practical terms, Stefan, I think, working with a system like Nispera, Fluence Nispera even, yeah, I mean, how do you engage with your O&M providers to take the learnings that come from Nispera to be actioned? And I'm just thinking in terms of, that could, to me, it seems like it could be implications in terms of everything from working with local site managers to making sure everything plays out as agreed in contracts. I mean, I note that you mentioned that some of the PPA contracts in particular are pretty stringent, I think was the word you used. So yeah, so how do you kind of take those insights from Nispera and then kind of, yeah, discuss or ask your O&M providers or your site working people how to kind of put those into action?
It's I think is a key aspect of our operation and of our asset management functionality at the moment, and I'm sure it will stay like that. As you mentioned, we've got the PPAs that's got some requirements in there. Our regulators have got requirements as well. Then we have the EPC contracts, which normally needs a closeout, and there's some performance metrics that needs to be met that we need to work with. And then we've got the O&M contractors on site that needs to be managed, and we obviously have some consultants who always want some information. What we do is firstly to try and do a very cooperative win-win situation. So when we see anything wrong on a plant, we use the information to the benefit of all parties. We phone up our O&M provider immediately because they could be penalized over time for unavailability, but we will certainly also lose. Even though they've made their thresholds for the year, we'll keep pushing to give the understanding that we know what our plants are about, but also that we want to work for the benefit of all parties to get the plant operational as much as possible. Again, there I can go to the tracker example. If we in the morning see a tracker or a string is not starting up, we'll get on the phone immediately on a very hands-on basis, phone the plant manager and make him aware of this. So most of the time they are aware, but we'll make sure that it gets done, that it gets started up. And again, on a personal basis, on a personal relationship. We also use it, on a contractual basis, where, for instance, if we need to verify a performance ratio, and we've had to do this, the contractors will give you a performance ratio from the SCADA system, maybe adjusted in certain ways. It will sometimes take us months to understand what they did. But we can immediately, from the same perspective, draw our own performance ratio evaluation via Nispera, get that updated and push it back to the contractor to say, look, this is what we're getting. Let's have a real discussion about the difference and not about how data is processed. And that's been very helpful to us. We've also done on maintenance aspects where we see a wind turbine is drifting outside of what it is supposed to be on the power curve. We've been able to use that data to say, look, your system is not indicating this, or you're not flagging this. We want this turbine evaluated, and it needs to be addressed pretty soon, so that we can all have benefit out of this process. And same to our in our PPAs, as I mentioned. If we have loss of energy because of any downtime, we now able to generate reports that gives us within the next day, we can issue our utilities with a claim to say, look, you've caused us this downtime, you owe us this much money, do you agree or not agree? And we can put that report down without people having to sit down and remember to do that. It's just there and we can go. So it's a very integral part of how we manage our operations today.
Okay, I mean, it sounds really, really useful, obviously, but I guess it was a new step to add in terms of your relationships with your O&M providers and other folks that you work with. So did that take a little bit of a period of adjustment to incorporate all of that? And kind of what was that like from your point of view?
I think you firstly experience that there's a bit of guardedness around the SCADA system. Firstly, how do you get into the SCADA system? How do you find the right tags of data so that you can draw that into Nispera? So there's always a bit of resistance there. And then there's a bit of unbelief, a period of disbelief. I mean, where a contractor does not believe that you actually have the right data there. And then it turns slowly over into a process of cooperation, because as an owner, once you really understand your data, you really understand your plants, and you can really give feedback to the contractors on what you expect next. Now we can move into real optimization, and that's what we've been able to do in the last year. Look at real opportunities for optimization, because our losses are quantified. Our contractor know we're talking about real losses there, and we can focus them and our teams on the right things. So it's been a gradual process, but at the moment there's a really good story of cooperation that is ongoing.
Excellent. Okay. And one last question from me before we go to the audience questions, because lots of audience questions popping in. But Gianmarco, we've been talking about a lot of the exciting stuff that's happening today in asset performance management. But yeah, I mean, what exciting things do you think might be in store for the future of asset performance management?
Well, for asset performance management specifically, and also looking at what we are working on, I see even more sophisticated models able to provide deeper insights into the operation of wind, solar, storage plants, and in the near future also looking at hydrogen and other technologies. Models like, for example, to predict the thermal runaway of a battery storage plant, or in real time wake losses in wind farms, or recognize patterns for certain alarms and warnings coming out from the SCADA system. There is a lot going on in this direction, but in general, in order to achieve the full optimization of the plants, I see an even stronger need for bringing together not only the performance view, but also the trading, the asset control, reliability, O&M. Eventually, the owner is interested into the full optimization of the value generation. So I see more sophisticated analytics coming, not only based on AI, capable, yes, to anticipate and detect failures and performance issues, but also to, for example, move into root cause identification, automatically issue work orders upon them, initiate spare parts procurements and workforce allocation, or, for example, changing, adapting, trading decisions, give in real time updates about the lifetime implication of certain O&M or trading decisions, and eventually, to close the loop, send back inputs to the control system of the plant in order to adapt the operation to these insights coming from these models. It's actually interesting to mention because at Fluence we are in a position that we can cover all these all these angles. I mean the performance one, the trading and the control with our capabilities we have in-house, meaning Nispera, Mosaic, and the Fluence OS. And we are actively trying to strengthen the ties between them and leveraging their close interplay to come up really with a more competitive and more offers for our clients, more value creation for our clients.
Interesting. So I guess the future of asset performance management is even more streamlined, but even more holistic, really, I guess, would be, if I was writing an article, I guess, from your quotes, that would be something like the headline. All right, excellent. So yeah, no further waiting for the audience members that have been patiently holding on to hear their questions asked. And as mentioned, far too many questions. There's several hundred of you watching today. So far too many questions to deal with completely, but why don't I just stop talking and ask some of the questions? So Bert asked a couple of questions. So audience member, thank you, Bert, for your questions. Asked a couple of questions in terms of data gathering and frequency. So I'm just going to read both of these out, if you wouldn't mind, and if you can just handle whichever points in them you think stand out to you, that would probably be a good way to do this. So Bert asked, can you expand on the type, quantity, update frequency, and quality of data that is being collected, differentiating between the 5 times to 100 times difference in data volume between solar and BESS respectively? So Gianmarco, I think that's earlier on you mentioned the 10,000 data points for a conventional thermal power plant, and then more than 1 million data points from BESS. So I don't know if you want to get into specifics of that, or if there's a sort of big picture answer there.
Well, I mean, the big picture is that obviously when we look at a battery storage plant with hundreds of thousands or millions of cells, that makes the difference compared to a conventional power generation plant. The question is obviously also has been made about which signals you read at which frequency, and this at one point, or well, already now becomes a question of, again, cost benefit, because to store and to process this amount of data comes at a significant cost. And as long as you are not able to have the right models to monetize this cost, obviously it wouldn't make too much sense to store all this data. On the other side, if you don't do it, you will not have it when you need it. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But our approach, also what we did with BT, it's really to try to take everything which is there in the highest possible resolution, simply because experience shows that at one point you will need it. And maybe one comment to make is all this obviously without any sensor or hardware installation, but simply using the data acquisition systems which are already in place through the primary SCADA system or through the meteo station or tracking system, whatever is already available on the plant.
Right, yeah, because we did have an audience question about that, actually, whether Nispera requires hardware such as sensors separately. But as you say, Gianmarco, no, it doesn't. It's a software based solution. And so, yeah, related question on that. So how do you deal with integrating new types of data during the life of the asset? So the questioner went on and kind of gave some examples, but I think that's probably enough to start answering that, isn't it? And then someone else, audience member Mujtaba, asked, what is the granularity of the real-time data? So I don't know if you're able to deal with both of those in one go.
Yeah, sure. So granularity can, thanks, Andy. Yeah, granularity can range from anything from second or depends on the technology, obviously, and on the signals which are read. Some seconds to 1 to 5 typical resolution or granularity in the wind industry is also 10 minutes, but the audience probably knows that if you want to do really advanced power curve analysis, a 10-minute granularity is not enough. And it depends. So varies from technology to technology, and then also from the data acquisition system which is in place, and on the signal which you are reading. Obviously, temperatures do not need the same high resolution as, for example, electrical signals. And when it comes to the second point of the question regarding the integration of additional data streams during the lifetime of the plant, I mean, this is something which can be done at any point in time when the need is there. And it doesn't require a full additional setup of the plant, but it can be, for example, an extension of the project where the wind farm suddenly gets more wind turbines, or it can be a new weather station which is installed, some additional pyranometers to better cover the local spread of irradiation. So all these things are dealt with as we move on by our support and onboarding engineers.
Okay. And sorry, and there's a somewhat related question there, but around granularity of data and battery energy storage systems. So Lakshman from the audience, thank you very much for your question, Lakshman, is asking, what is the granularity of data you would need to typically run your AI model for battery storage? And then a secondary question, if Fluence, who we know as a system integrator and battery storage manufacturer, is Fluence able to perform similar dashboards for non-Fluence battery energy storage systems?
Yes, to the second question, absolutely yes. I mean, we are looking at the projects irrespective of the manufacturer. And to the resolution, the AI which we are running at the moment on battery storage plants is for temperature monitoring of enclosures, racks, modules, and that I'm not sure anymore about the exact time resolution, but it's definitely not the highest. I think is in the range of 1 to 2 minutes, whereas the highest time resolution is something in the millisecond range. And obviously you don't need that when it comes to temperatures. We can clarify with the person who asked offline. I need to check with my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one that I need to check with you guys here. So these are a couple of questions that technical style questions that kind of went a little bit over my head. I'm going to admit that now. So I'll see if you guys...
Just to confirm quickly, I mean, we are in the portfolio of clients we are serving. We obviously have Fluence storage plants, but also from Fluence competitors. So just to be absolutely clear. So and the analytics and the dashboards we provide are independent from that.
Excellent. So the old, we love technology agnosticism in the clean energy industry, don't we? And I think it's good to carry that on. So audience member Tommaso was asking if you offer real-time APIs into EM systems or ERPs, or otherwise, how can a user retrieve the data? Now, Obviously, I'm completely aware of what all those acronyms are, but if
No,
you
well,
could just explain for the benefit of the for some of the audience.
the answer is
So
a simple yes, and the audience knows very well what that means. I mean, it's essential to have this for the seamless and integration of data streams among different solutions and systems, not only within your organization, but also with external third parties. So the answer is yes.
and just for my benefit, APIs being asset performance indicators, is that right?
No, API is basically an automated way how to exchange data.
That was the other one. Yeah, that was the other one I Googled earlier. Okay. Moving swiftly on with egg on my face. Let me do, so there was a question here about reports from Pablo. What about reports for warranty and battery performance guarantee compliance?
Well, specifically on battery, I would call this generic. I mean, Stefan already mentioned some of the reports which we configured for compliance with PPAs or with contractual KPIs on solar plants. Specifically for batteries, what was it on warranty and?
Warranty and battery performance guarantee compliance.
Yeah, this is something which basically we configure similarly to what Stefan mentioned, configure for our client depending on the specific warranties or conditions they have in their O&M agreements for their battery plants. It's, let's say, the configuration of the KPIs for the clients, the contractual KPIs for the client. It's
okay, and
done
yeah,
in the
sorry,
setup phase.
Okay, and we've got, like, these questions are pretty heavy on the emphasis on battery storage. So I don't know if there's anything to be said in terms of warranties and performance guarantees for other types of clean energy technologies. I don't know if Stefan, you've got any particular comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think the value lies in doing comparisons. So you can find equipment that is performing not the same as the others. When you are looking more at let's say a serial defect, it will be difficult to pick that up if it's across the board. But the value really lies there in that you have performance of a large number of systems, and you can really accurately see when the performance is out of line with the rest, and that's been where we've been able to use it successfully on component level, or maybe more string level, or and then on plant level. Performance on plant level, very easy. Performance when you go down, it's a little bit more tricky to get to the warranty stage, but you can see an outlier for sure.
And this can also change in time. You know, I mean, it might be that for a certain project, after 1, 2, 3 years, you change your O&M agreement. It means you have different contractual warranties. So obviously, at that point, you need to reconfigure the calculations. But it happens. It's common practice, I would say.
Fantastic. Okay, I think probably in the interest of time, unfortunately, we're going to have to draw an end to it there for today. As we say, there are lots of questions asked, lots of really interesting questions asked that, you know, we would love to spend more time on, but yeah, as we are, we're going to have to draw a line under it there. But just to say that obviously Fluence will be reaching out to everyone that asked a question. And as you can see, we do have both Stefan and Gianmarco's respective email addresses and company websites that you can follow on to for more information about that. You can even scan the QR code if you like that sort of thing to contact the Nispera sales team as well. So that's displayed on the screen at the moment. So with all of that, just remains for me to thank the hundreds of you that joined the session today. And of course, to Stefan and Gianmarco for joining us and making the session what it was. A lot of great insights there. And I think everyone will appreciate kind of how open you've been in sharing your knowledge of this, this exciting aspect of the industry. So yeah, I just want to thank you both very much for joining. And also from myself, just to say thanks finally to everyone watching, but also thank you for all the great work you're doing within this exciting industry and this exciting sector. Very much hope that you can join us again soon for our future webinars. And yeah, to keep in touch with the industry via what we do. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, Stefan and Gianmarco.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Andy.
Andy. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.